2 eggs, a bucket of milk, 3 pieces of bread, and some sugar. That's all we need. Don't go running off or wasting our money on those stupid sideshows," said my father. "Yes, sir," I said. As soon as I turned around, my dad yelled, "And be home before it gets dark." I never really understood why I was always told to be home before dark. All I know is everyone in town had locked their doors and windows after dark, ever since the king was attacked in his sleep by a dozen of assassins. It's not like the assassins would come after commoners like me. "Yes, sir," I said, and I ran out into the road towards town. My dad always sent me out because, even though he hates to admit it, he's aged and can't fight off thieves or skeletons as well as he used to. I'm only 18, but I can handle my own a lot better than most. I made my way through farmlands. It didn't take too long to get to the city walls. Man, I always loved being in the city. The smell of food and kids laughing and playing around. Most of all, I love sideshows. Some theater scenes would be acted out in the courtyards, and puppet shows would be held, traveling circuses acts and cool things to watch. Every time I go to the city, I end up spending all the money on the shows. Not today, I thought. I entered the market and got to the supplies I needed. I left the shop and noticed the people in town were acting so strange. Nightfall was getting closer. My dad had always told me to leave the city walls after dark. Not sure why, but his big blockhead would get uneasy and change the subject with demanding I do chores. So I usually avoid the subject, to avoid chores. Walking toward the main gate about a half a mile off, I turned through the building and alleyways, and people slammed their doors shut and scurried their kids into their city homes. Their circus folk and side attractions locked themselves in their back trailers and wool tents. I felt uneasy with all this panic. I started to sweat a little and saw that I was far from the gate when it had already been closed. Oh boy. I ran towards it and banged on the door with my stone sword. "Hey, cut that out," scolded a guard from high above the main gate. "Get to your home." "Don't you know what day it is?" he asked. "My home is outside in the farmlands. I need to get out," I let him know. "Sorry, kid. You're gonna have to spend your night here. You might want to hurry and find an inn or something." I headed back towards the buildings. It was really dark now. I heard laughter echo through the alleyways, and it sent a chill through my spine. I panicked, so I sprinted till I found a public library. I went around the back and heard laughter blast through the streets and alleyways. I took my wooden axe and started cutting through the back of the library. I chopped fast because the laughter got louder and louder and closer and closer. I got it! I finally got through the wall and shoved a wooden plank and a piece of staircase I had with me from working on the farm. It covered up most of the hole, but a dash of purple appeared and the laughter faded away. I ran to the front of the library and looked through the windows to see nothing but dark roads and dim lights. The city was quiet. I searched the library to make sure doors and windows were locked. After I laid down in a small studying room, I checked my golden clock and realized I had a long time before sunrise. I fell asleep and had a dream of laughter and a view of the old king being killed. I heard someone yell, "No!" and I turned and attacked him, and I couldn't help but laugh so hard it woke me up. I then realized that the laughter wasn't in my dream. It was coming from outside. I heard a girl screaming for help. I was terrified, but I know I couldn't leave her out there. Out on her own, with that psycho running through the streets. I grabbed my equipment and armed my sword and made my way to the entrance. I unlocked the front door and crept out slowly. Darkness swallowed the city streets in every direction I looked. I was able to make out the roads from the moonlight. I took another look at my clock. I had about 5 hours till sunrise. I had to find this girl before anything happened. I followed the cries for help when suddenly within the next block I heard the banging of doors and footsteps running on the sidewalk. I ran towards the sound and turned the corner and saw Not a girl, but a man. A jester. He gazed directly at me and yelled, "Help me!" in a female voice and stomped to make the sound of a running person. I realized it was him the whole time. He smiled at me and started laughing, hysterically. I pointed my sword at him, but that only made him laugh even harder. He pulled out a small red ball. A tomato? He threw it at me so quickly I didn't have time to move, and it slammed me so badly in the face it sent me on my ass. The laughter grew wildly, and I couldn't see him until I wiped my eyes, and he was right in front of me. He looked down at me, chuckling lightly, then drew his sword. Strange-looking sword. He lunged downward at me, and I unfroze just in time to move out of the way. The sword cracked the road, and he finally turned his head, still laughing, but his eyes looked furious. I grabbed my sword and ran away, chuckling behind me. I heard him say, "I'm gonna get you." I went down an alleyway to cut through the buildings, but it got too dark, and I was no longer able to see, so I stopped. Looked around. Oh my, it's dark. Fun. I backed up into a brick house and felt around and slided quickly backwards toward the lighted up street. I turned back and nothing was there. Just darkness. I looked toward the street, and only inches from my face was a scraped up face painted white with a blue smile. "I got you." He grabbed me and threw me into the weak house wall. On impact, I could hear my body crack. I was hoping it was the wood, but the pain told me otherwise. A man and woman rushed away to hide from this jester while I lay still in serious pain. I looked down at myself and noticed a bone from my rib cage surfacing from my side. I couldn't scream because it hurt. I fell back ready to take my death. The jester looked at me with a smile, and then looked at the man and woman with a very grim frown. Sweat was melting off his makeup, and he walked towards them. I screamed, "No, you stay away from them." He looked back at me and smiled angrily, if that's possible. He ran towards the couple and grabbed the man's face and slammed it into the window. His blocked face gushed blood all over his wife. She screamed, and he slapped her so hard she had fallen over and crawled towards me. "Help me," she whimpered. "What could I do? Did she not see I was in pain? Did she not see my fucking bones ripping my own skin?" The jester jammed his hand down the man's corpse and pulled out the man's spine, slowly while singing a song. "One by one they all disappear. Silence them, so the screams I can't hear." He turned and looked at the woman crawling away. "Where are you going, sweetheart?" he said to her. Then he swung the spine and started to whip her with it. Over and over, her blood hit me, and I couldn't do anything but watch. She screamed at me until blood flooded her mouth, and she died, leaking blood towards me. As soon as her scream silenced, I heard a crying sound from upstairs. The jester looked down at me and laughed. "Don't go anywhere," he said to me. He stepped on top of my chest and walked upstairs. It hurt so bad I screamed in pain and coughed out blood. Cries kept going on, and I could hear the jester singing his demented song. I dragged myself away and pushed open the front door and fell down the wooden staircase. I quietly screamed and dragged myself under the house. My head was ringing. I couldn't faintly hear the baby crying. As soon as my head stopped, well, so did the crying. I heard a loud crack, and I leaned back into the dark of the house and wanted to cry, but the footsteps loomed over me. I heard the jester's bells from his shoes and hat jingling through the house. The front door opened, and he stepped out. played and watched him look around. He walked back into the house and it got quiet, until footsteps quickly grew louder and the door opened once more. He had dropped the baby's corpse right in front of the door and said, "Yuck." I looked at the corpse, and a few seconds later, I passed out. I woke up and saw that it was daylight. People and city guards were surrounding the house. I was able to crawl out. People stared and guards came to my aid. I felt ashamed. I let that family die. But for me it was over. A group of soldiers escorted me by carriage back home. My dad rushed outside and tried to carry me. I finally got to lay in the comfort of my bed while the soldiers explained what had happened. I fell asleep in bed and woke up in a massive amount of pain, but I was able to make it to the living room. I wish I hadn't. My dad was dead on the floor with his blood spread across the walls into words. One by one, they all disappear. Silence them, so the screams I can't hear. No one gets away, and no one escapes the fear.